She had only wanted to breathe. For 3 days, she ran through hills and forests, hiding from every sound. Her bare feet were torn, her legs weak, but for the first time in her life, she had felt alive. She had never heard the word freedom said aloud, but in those stolen days, she had lived it. She ate berries from the bushes and drank from muddy streams, slept under the sky with nothing above her but stars. There were no commands, no eyes watching, no hands reaching for her like she was an object. But freedom in Rome was not a gift for women like her. It was a crime. When the guards finally caught her, they didn't speak. They only tied her wrists and dragged her back. Her mouth was dry, her body trembled. But worse than fear was the look in their eyes. Not rage, not cruelty, just routine. They had done this before. They would do it again. They led her through the edge of the estate, past workshops and stables, until they reached a stone building with thick smoke spilling from the roof. Inside stood a man in dark robes, sleeves rolled, hands busy at the fire. A stigmata, the one who brands. He didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. The iron rod was already glowing white, pulled from the burning coals with metal tongs. She was pushed to her knees. Her face was forced upward. She barely had time to scream. The iron hit her forehead with a sound like meat thrown on fire. The pain came all at once, sharp, hot, screaming through her nerves. The smell of her own skin burning made her stomach turn. She thrashed, but they held her still. She sobbed, choking on the smoke, her body shaking uncontrollably. When they finally pulled the iron away, her skin hissed. People outside could hear her cries. But no one came. The letters were clear and deep. FVG fugitive. She was now marked. Forever. A moving message burned into her flesh. Not for healing, not for justice. Just to remind everyone every day what she had dared to do. It didn't matter that she was hungry, that she had never hurt anyone. She had tried to run, and for that Rome had a process. A systemed branding was not a moment of cruelty. It was a rule, a label, a warning. She would never be able to hide again. That smell, her own burned flesh, stayed with her. In her hair, in her clothes, in her mind. Even later, when she slept in a corner of the workshop with blood still dripping down her face, she could smell it, and so could the others. They were forced to watch as it happened. Other women, other slaves, their eyes wide, their backs straight, too afraid to flinch. That was the point. Rome didn't just punish. It taught through terror. They knew what would happen if they ran. She knew now, too. It was morning when they dragged her to the front of the master's home, the Janua, the main doorway that opened to the busy Roman street. This wasn't done in secret. This was for everyone to see. 2 guards pushed her against the stone column near the entrance. Her arms were pulled tight behind her back, and thick iron cuffs were snapped around her wrists. Another chain circled her ankles. The metal bit into her skin, cutting where the branding still burned. There was no shade, no rest, no escape. Neighbors passed by. Some glanced for a second and looked away. Others stared. Some spat near her feet. The children were the worst, laughing, pointing, throwing bits of bread already black with mold. She had become furniture. Not a person, not even an animal. Just something placed there to make a point. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and with it came the heat. Sweat ran down her back. Flies gathered on the wound at her forehead. She blinked them away, but they always returned. The chains didn't move. Her arms began to ache, her shoulders burning from the tight position. Still, no one spoke to her. That night it rained. The cold water soaked her to the bone. Her teeth chattered. She shivered violently, muscles cramping in the chains. There was no dry place. No blanket, no food. They had left her there to be forgotten by comfort, remembered only as a warning. The next morning, a group of merchants walked past. One of them laughed as he kicked dust into her face. "Run again," he said. "We'll see how far you get next time." Behind him, the master's steward gave a nod of approval. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since her return. Her lips cracked from thirst. Her wrists were raw. Blood had dried and mixed with dirt. But still, they left her there. The point wasn't to punish her quietly. The point was to turn her into part of the house, a living statue of shame. And for women, the humiliation cut deeper. Roman culture taught that a woman should be modest, hidden, obedient. But here she was, exposed, chained, displayed like a criminal, her dress soaked through, sticking to her skin, her head low, her body aching. Passers-by were encouraged to say things, to mock her, to call her names. Even other slaves were forced to participate. One young girl, maybe no older than 12, was ordered to throw spoiled fruit at her. She hesitated. The overseer stepped forward, whip in hand. The girl obeyed. That night the chains grew tighter. Her ankles had swollen, the cuffs pressed into bone. Infection began to creep in, hot red lines spreading under the skin. Her breath grew shallow. Her eyes closed often, but every noise startled her awake. Still no one came, and that was the Roman way. They didn't need to beat her again. The silence, the stares, the exposure, this was enough. She had tried to leave. Now, she couldn't move an inch without metal slicing her skin. She wasn't a servant anymore. She was a lesson. They had pulled her from the chains before sunrise, cleaned her barely enough to stand, and transported her in a wooden cart with others just like her, tired, silent, eyes hollow. They had told her nothing, no explanation, no judgment, but she had heard the whispers. She was going to die, not in private, not in the dark corners of a cell, but in front of thousands. When the cart stopped, they waited. And then, one by one, they were dragged into the holding tunnels beneath the arena. Here the air was thick with damp stone and old blood. The walls echoed with the muffled roars of the crowd above. She could hear them, laughing, shouting, stomping. Then came the handlers. They opened the gate and forced her forward. No weapons, no shield, just her torn tunic and bare feet. Her hands were tied in front of her with thin rope. Pointless. She wouldn't fight. That wasn't what they wanted. The sand of the arena was warm underfoot. She stepped into blinding sunlight. The noise hit her like a wave. Thousands of eyes. All on her. Men and women in rich robes leaning over the railings. Children sitting in their parents' laps. Some held food. Some held betting slips. No one looked away. To them, she wasn't a woman. She was entertainment. In the center of the arena stood a wooden post. She was led there and tied to it. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the announcer above. But she caught one word, bestiae, the beasts. Then the gate across the arena creaked open. Out walked a lion, thin, angry, ribs showing through its fur. Its head lowered. Its eyes locked on her. It had been starved for days. Its handlers had made sure of that. She closed her eyes, praying it would be quick, but it wasn't. The lion circled. It roared. The crowd cheered. It paced, sniffed the air, and then struck. The pain was sharp, then dull, then sharp again. She didn't remember the scream, but the people did. Some shouted for more. Some laughed. Some looked away, but only briefly. This wasn't justice. This was theater, and she wasn't the only act. Others were brought out. Some forced to fight each other with small knives. Some killed by leopards or bears. Some made to act out twisted plays before dying. It didn't matter how. It only mattered that they died slowly, visibly, painfully. The sand soaked up their blood. But it never truly washed clean. Between shows, slaves with hooks dragged the bodies away. Limbs were collected in baskets. The next woman was sent out as the stains from the last still steamed in the sun. Even historians recorded it, how the crowd bet on whether the women would scream, how long they would last, how they would fall. Roman writers like Martial didn't write with shame. They wrote with interest, as if this was normal, because to Rome it was. Women who ran didn't get mercy. They got spectacle. Their death became the warning. And as the crowd roared again, ready for the next act, her blood still warm on the sand, Rome proved one more time. They didn't just punish. They watched. Her feet barely touched the ground. Her arms stretched above her head. Wrists bound tight with rope that had already soaked through with blood from another woman the day before. The post stood at the edge of the training yard, away from the master's house, but close enough that anyone walking by could hear what was about to happen. This time there was no crowd of cheering Romans. No lions, no arena. Just a courtyard, a leather whip, and silence until the first strike. The whip they used was no simple rope. It was a flagrum, a cruel Roman invention, leather strands, each tipped with bits of bone, metal or glass. It didn't just hurt, it tore. When it landed, it didn't leave lines. It opened wounds. She screamed. The sound echoed through the courtyard. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Someone chuckled. The second strike came quickly, then the third. She lost count after 10. Blood ran down her back in thick, sticky streams. Her legs gave out, but the ropes held her up. She hung there, her body jerking with every lash. Her breath came in short gasps. She couldn't scream anymore. No one told the whip-bearer to stop. There were no limits, no laws to protect her. Under Roman rule, a slave was property, and property had no rights. By the time they were done, her skin had been stripped away in places, revealing raw muscle underneath. Her back looked like torn cloth, ragged and open. Every breath she took sent a wave of fire through her spine, but her punishment wasn't over. They didn't clean the wounds. They didn't even unchain her. She was left there in the sun, flies already swarming, sweat mixed with blood. Her tunic soaked in red clung to her body. She couldn't lean back, couldn't rest. She was expected to work the next day. Her body didn't heal. It festered. The wounds began to smell within hours. The flies brought infection. Her skin turned dark at the edges of each gash. Her eyes were glassy. She no longer spoke, but others did. They walked past. They stared. Some whispered. Others turned away. One slave dropped a bucket of water nearby and whispered, "I'm sorry," before rushing off. This wasn't an isolated punishment. In Roman households, whippings were common, expected. Writers like Horace and Petronius mentioned them like they were nothing, like describing the weather. A woman might be whipped for breaking a dish, for answering back, or, in her case, for daring to run. And the whip didn't just leave marks, it left damage that never healed. Some women never walked again after a flogging. Others lost control of their limbs, or suffered from pain for the rest of their lives. Spinal injuries were common. Infections killed many days or weeks later quietly, without fanfare. But death wasn't always the goal. Pain was, a constant visible reminder. Even when the blood stopped flowing, the scars remained. They told a story. This woman tried to escape and Rome made her regret it. She couldn't sleep, couldn't lie down. Every twitch of her muscles reopened the wounds. Her body wasn't just broken. It was ruined, but Rome didn't care. Rome didn't stop, and this wasn't the worst they could do. There was still one place darker than any arena, quieter than any whipping yard: the mines. She lay in the back with 3 other slaves, barely conscious. Her body was broken, her back torn open from the flogging. She didn't remember when they loaded her in. Only the sound of wheels turning, the distant shouts of guards, and the growing chill in the air as they traveled farther from the estate. When they arrived, it was still dark. No sunrise, no open sky, just a narrow tunnel carved into the earth and the flickering of torches leading deep into the ground. This was her sentence now, damnatio in metallum, condemned to the mines. Not for days, not for weeks, but for life. No trial, no second chance. They dragged her out of the cart and pushed her toward the entrance. She tried to stand on her own, but her legs gave out. A guard kicked her forward. She crawled. The tunnel swallowed her. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something worse: death. Every breath scratched her throat. She coughed, and the sound was lost in the echo of picks striking rock. There were no windows, no light, except the dull yellow flame of oil lamps. Other women were already inside, their faces hollow, their hands cracked and bleeding, their hair matted with sweat and dirt. Some looked at her with pity. Others didn't look at all. There was no speaking, only digging. She was handed a rusted pick and led to a narrow shaft barely wide enough for her to stand. Her job was to chip away at the wall, collect the rocks, carry them out, over and over, until her body couldn't anymore. There were no breaks, no water unless a guard allowed it, no food unless someone remembered, and always the dust. It clung to her skin, her eyes, her lungs. She began to bleed from her nose after the first day. Her fingers split open. Her back, still raw from the whipping, rubbed against stone every time she moved. The pain was constant, sharp, exhausting, and that was just the beginning. The deeper she went, the worse it became. The heat, the silence, the madness. Some miners coughed so hard they spat blood. Others shook from mercury exposure. Trembling hands, lost teeth, blank stares. One woman had gone blind. Another screamed at nothing. There was no help. No doctors. No pity. If someone collapsed, they were dragged into a side tunnel and left there. No burial, no prayer, just silence. The smell of death never left the air, and when a tunnel caved in, no one came to dig them out. The rocks stayed. The bodies stayed. Their screams were sometimes heard for hours, even days, before fading away forever. New workers were brought in to dig somewhere else. She learned quickly not to ask questions, not to speak, only to keep her head down and work. Her world shrank to the size of her tunnel. A stretch of darkness, a few steps wide and filled with suffering. There was no night or day in the mines, only the ache in her bones, the taste of blood in her mouth, the endless sound of stone breaking. She began to forget what sunlight felt like, what grass looked like, what her own voice sounded like, and that was the goal. Unlike the public punishments meant to shame, the mines were built to erase, to remove a person from the world completely, to make them disappear without a trace. She had tried to run. Rome hadn't killed her quickly. Instead, it had buried her alive, and here in the dark, her story would end. Inside the mine, time lost all meaning. There were no sunrises, no sunsets, only the soft hiss of oil lamps and the endless sound of picks against stone. She no longer remembered how long she'd been underground. A week, a month, maybe more. Her mind stopped keeping count. That too was part of the punishment. Her body had changed. Her fingers were bent and swollen. The skin along her palms had split open in places, forming deep, dark cracks filled with dirt and blood. Her back ached constantly. The wounds from the whipping had become infected. The smell of rot clung to her and to everyone around her. No one said anything. Everyone carried that same stench. She worked beside other women, some older, some barely more than girls. They rarely spoke. Their eyes had the same emptiness hers now held. One had gone completely mad, scratching at the walls, mumbling to herself, lashing out at anyone who got too close. The guards didn't remove her. They simply chained her to a shaft wall and left her there. Still alive! That was Rome's way. Madness wasn't an accident. It was the plan. Sometimes the ground would shake. When that happened, everyone froze. They knew what it meant. Tunnel collapse. Once a section behind her crumbled without warning. Dust filled the air. Screams echoed through the mine as the rocks buried 2 women alive. No rescue, no digging. Just a few angry words from a guard telling them to move their work line further forward. The 2 women were forgotten before their screams had faded. She learned to step over bones. Some were half buried in the walls, others poked from piles of rubble. No one dared touch them. That was what you became when the work was done with you. Rubble. The food, when it came, was stale and barely enough to keep breathing. A crust of bread. A cup of water. The guards liked to punish slow workers by skipping their rations. Once she went 3 days without food. On the 4th, when she collapsed from hunger, they beat her for falling behind. Sleep didn't offer relief. Even resting against the rock wall was painful. Her body ached constantly. She twitched in her sleep, woke up gasping. Her dreams were filled with the surface, trees, open air, birds, but they always turned to nightmares, always ended with chains or fire, or the sound of metal against flesh. Her hair had thinned, her teeth loosened. Some had already fallen out. Mercury in the air poisoned slowly. No one warned them. No one cared. She sometimes forgot her own name, forgot the color of the sky, the sound of laughter, the feeling of grass beneath her feet. That was the cruelest part, not the pain, not even the death, but the erasure, the slow, silent removal of everything she was, until there was nothing left but a broken body in a narrow tunnel, swinging a pick, waiting for the day when she, too, would be buried in the dark. No one would write her name, no one would mourn her, and the mine would go on. The villas still gleamed in the sun. The market still buzzed with merchants and gossip. The baths were still warm, the temples still fragrant with incense. Citizens walked in sandals over clean marble streets, arguing about taxes, gladiators, or the emperor's latest affair. Life continued, and beneath all that, beneath their wine and laughter, she rotted in the dark. No one remembered her face, not even the household she once served. Another slave had taken her duties, scrubbed her floors, fed her master's dogs. Her space had been filled, her name no longer spoken. In the ledgers, she was now just a number. Labor assigned to metallum noricum, female. Condition, usable. Rome didn't care if she lived. Rome only cared that the mind kept producing. She had stopped bleeding weeks ago, but her body hadn't healed. Her wounds had simply dried into thick, raised scars. Her back was hard and stiff, as if her skin had turned to stone. Her hands barely closed anymore. The pickaxe slipped often, and each time it did, a guard would beat her ribs with a rod. She didn't cry out anymore. There was nothing left in her to scream. Once she had tried to hum to herself, a song her mother used to sing, one of the only memories still flickering in her mind. But the other women had stared at her, their eyes wide, terrified. Singing was not allowed. Sound reminded you that you were still human. She never sang again. The madness came slowly. It began with the shaking, her hands trembling at the wrist, unable to grip. Then the sounds, the echo of picks became whispers in her ears. Voices that weren't there. Faces in the stone. She blinked and they disappeared. Blinked again and they returned. She began to talk to the wall. Sometimes it answered. She was still forced to work. Even when she couldn't walk straight. Even when she collapsed from exhaustion. They tied her to a post and propped her up, made her swing the pick with ropes around her arms. When she vomited blood, they slapped her awake. No sleeping, the guard said. You'll sleep when you die. And that was the truth. There was no release except death. Some women gave up and stopped moving altogether. They sat in their tunnels and waited. The guards didn't bother dragging them out. Their bodies stayed where they fell, eyes open, mouths dry. Some were still in a seated position when their skin turned grey. The rest kept digging. What choice did they have? There were no uprisings here, no rebellion, no Spartacus, just silence and dust. You didn't escape the mines. You dissolved into them. And when she finally collapsed for the last time, they didn't even stop work. Another woman was brought in the next morning, younger, stronger. The cycle continued, and above the city carried on, oblivious. Tourists passed the old mine entrances years later, taking pictures, smiling. No one heard the whispers in the stone. No one asked who had died down there. The empire that once ruled the world collapsed into dust. The marble statues crumbled. The roads cracked and broke. Emperors were forgotten. Even the mighty Colosseum, where crowds once roared as slaves died for entertainment, became a ruin, a backdrop for photos, a story in a guidebook. But beneath that ruin, the truth never disappeared. The marks remained. In museums today, you can still see the slave collars, real ones, etched with words like tenimene fafgia, hold me, so I don't run. Metal once locked around the throats of women who had no names. Collars made not to protect, but to remind. You can still find lists of branded slaves, their punishments recorded like inventories. Records written in neat Latin handwriting, describing pain without emotion, burned, whipped, sentenced to labor, dead. And the historians who wrote it all down, Seneca, Tacitus, Suetonius, they told the truth, but they didn't condemn it. Seneca wrote that slaves were human, but still owned them. Tacitus described the punishments, but made no calls to end them. Suetonius mentioned slave branding like he mentioned wine or parades, just another Roman detail. Not one of them fought for change. Not one of them stood for her. They were witnesses, not allies, because in Rome, suffering wasn't hidden. It was structured, legal, efficient. Rome built systems around cruelty. They had officials to brand, arenas to execute, and accountants to count the dying. They didn't hide the horror. They organized it. That's the lesson history keeps repeating. When pain becomes normal, when a scream is seen as routine, when a person is turned into a number, that's when a civilization crosses a line it can never uncross. People today remember Spartacus, The man who rose, the fighter, the rebel, but few remember the women who tried to run, who bore the brands, who stood chained to the Anua, who died in the dark with dust in their lungs, who were torn apart before cheering crowds, who lost their names beneath the weight of stone. They were forgotten until now, because history doesn't only belong to emperors and soldiers, it belongs to her too, the runaway, the slave, the woman who dared to want more. Her name may be lost, but her story, this story, will not be. If that disturbed you, then remember this is not fiction. This is what they actually wrote. This is what Rome really did, and the ruins still stand. The arena still casts a shadow, but now you know what lies beneath it.